So, as you may know, or as you may not know, Liz and I are heavily into a serious marathon training block. I'm increasing mileage. Well, Liz is as well, but I'm talking about me as usual. I'm increasing mileage and I'm probably pushing the run quality aspects too, and certainly not taking any rest days. There are no complete rest days in my program, advanced marathoning. It's kind of not surprising I started to get sore and developed a bit of a knee pain. It seemed to get easier once warmed up, so I kept sort of training through. Went to see the physio. My physio concluded my knee pain was coming from restricted hip mobility and a weak glute on one side. Many weeks of exercise later, things are getting a bit better, and I've been able to keep going with pretty big mileage throughout. Who would have known that A, my knee was caused by my hip, and B, I didn't actually have to stop running to go through all of that? Well, our guests today would have known, actually. In fact, they wrote a book about it. Hi, and welcome to the Running Book Reviews podcast, where we review books written for runners, about runners, and by runners to help you decide if you'd like to read the book for yourself. We also hope that listening to us chat about running to keep you motivated about your own running, or maybe inspire you to try something new, or maybe in this case, keep you running. My name's Alan, and with my co-host Liz, we're going to talk today with authors Emmi Aguillard, Jonathan Kane, and Allison Goldstein about their book, Run Healthy.
So Run Healthy is a book dedicated to injuries. The authors tell runners about different tissues in the body and how they respond to stress and healing, areas of the body to pay attention to so that you can prevent injury, common injuries that runners get and what the issues commonly are, and components of healthy training. The book is divided into 4 parts: the runner's body, body regions, common conditions, and healthy training. Because we know that you're probably already thinking about your last injury and wondering how to rehab it or how to prevent it in the future, some common injuries they talk about in the common conditions section are plantar fasciitis, Achilles tendinitis, Shin splints, hamstring tendinitis and tendinopathy, and IT band syndrome. So I think probably everybody listening has had one of those, so you're already interested. So who are the authors? Well, there's 3 of them. So Emmi Aguillard is a full-time physical therapist with a doctorate degree in physical therapy, as well as several other certifications, who manages her own private practice that specializes in treating runners. She has advanced training in pelvic health and works with women during and after pregnancy to maintain their fitness and then return to running postpartum. Outside of her PT practice, Emmi also coaches runners from the Dashing Whippets running team, which has an impressive 900 members. Like, I had to reread that 3 times because that's a lot. That's a big club. Next is author Jonathan Kane, also known as Coach Kane. He has been coaching endurance athletes for over 30 years. He has a master's degree in exercise physiology and has coached for Nike, Jackrabbit, and Under Armour. Kane is also an author previous to this book. He co-authored Triathlon Anatomy and The Complete Idiot's Guide to Strength Training. I feel like we could use that one.
Why are you looking at me?
Yeah, I'm just looking. He also writes for Triathlon Magazine, Metro Sports Magazine, New York Runner, and more. Kane has been a speaker for Nike, New York Roadrunners, Chelsea Piers Triathlon Club, Hospital for Special Surgery, and others. Now on to Allison Goldstein. She's a writer and editor who works with business leaders, award-winning academics, and professionals to bring their literary ideas to the world. Her work has appeared in Runner's World, Women's Running, Bicycling, Popular Mechanics, and other publications. She's also a fast runner herself and competed in the 2020 U.S. Marathon Trials. So just for reference, I'll just say that in order to compete, you actually need a 2:45 marathon. So she's quite fast. So welcome all 3 of you to the podcast.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks so much for having us.
Great. So the first question that we always ask is is how you guys decided to write this book, but I think we'll also add, like, how did you decide to write it together?
Okay, I'll field this one. So I had just finished the book you mentioned, so Triathlon Anatomy, which I wrote for Human Kinetics with Dr. Mark Cleon. We had just finished that up, and I had sort of wiped my brow and said, okay, I'm never writing another book again. That was too much work. And then Human Kinetics called and said, hey, do you want to write another book? They said they wanted to write something about running injuries. And I then realized, well, my training is really in keeping runners healthy and getting them fast, but not necessarily, but definitely not in treating those injuries. So I said, I'll do it, but I need to team up with a physical therapist. And I had known Emmi for a little while professionally. So reached out to her. We sat and talked, realized that there was a nice balance there between the two of us. But then we also realized that our friend Allison is the real professional writer among the three of us. Like Emmi and I can put together a coherent sentence or two, but Allison's the real pro when it comes to writing. And as you mentioned, has a strong running background. So we pulled her in, and here we are.
So who's the book aimed at, I guess? Well, I won't guess anything. I'll ask you the question. Who's the book aimed at, and sort of who do you think should be reading it?
So definitely, it's a little bit, we tried, and Allison, I think, gets full credit for this, to kind of write it in a language that pretty much anyone can get through. But I think, as I was writing this book, I was really thinking it's kind of geared towards people like you guys, kind of the nerdy runners who are marathon training, who kind of want to manage their injuries on their own as best as they can. I think it's a great reference for like a coach. If you're working with runners, this has a lot of information. I had a goal of mine in writing the book was kind of giving people like actionable little pieces that they could take away from it, because, you read, you're like, oh, you should foam roll, but everyone's like, okay, but like, how do I do that? You should strengthen your glutes, but how do I do that? So I really wanted to get a lot of kind of those how-tos in the injury portion of the book. And then other professionals, so like other physical therapists, who maybe don't have as much experience running and working with runners, athletic trainers, high school coaches, people like that. Anything I left out, Allison or Jonathan?
I think that was the real challenge, was finding that balance, because yes, it was written and we wanted it to be applicable for other health professionals, your peers, my peers, but we also wanted it to be something that was approachable and understandable for your average runner, who doesn't necessarily have the clinical background. And again, I think that's where Allison really came in, and sort of, I think at times when you and I would use a little too much technical jargon, Allison would make it understandable and have it make sense and be approachable for that whole wide range, which I think, I know I struggled with how to do that, but I think Allison helped us bridge that gap.
It's a tricky topic to write about because you do need so much kind of anatomy language.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was a fine line to walk, but hopefully, you guys read it. You can tell us if we did it successfully, but you have to kind of educate the reader a bit on what we're even talking about in order to get them to understand why things are happening and then how to solve them.
Just to jump right to the end, in my summary at the end, I actually say exactly that, Allison, that you did a good job of basically bringing it to people who maybe are not physiology or human anatomy specialists. They just know my leg hurts, my ankle's hurting, and it gets worse when I do this. And you kind of talk us into that pretty nicely.
Yeah, I guess I'll just add in also that I think, like, as runners, like, all we care about really is like, well, so now what do we do? So I like the and I guess we might get to it like later as well, but I like that at the beginning of the book there's actually a little chart with like the exercises and what page they're on, because you finish reading a book and you're like, oh, that was great, okay, and where was that thing that I wanted to try? So so you guys summarize it in a table, which is great. And the good thing that you did that I liked was at the beginning, you kind of mentioned that, like, yes, it's a book. Yes, you're trying to help runners, but like there are some situations where they actually need professional help and they should see a professional. I just wanted to, like, I know you go into depth about, when should they see a doctor versus a PT, a registered dietitian, and other like other people, like chiropractors. But maybe can you just go over when should people see a doctor versus a PT? Because I find that sometimes as runners, almost like PTs are better, because you go to the doctor and like they need to, you know, do orthopedic surgery on your knee because like you have knee pain. And you know, sometimes like then with time you find out that, oh well, if I do these exercises, like I feel better, because you know, I have a friend that that was exactly in that situation. Like she's been seeing a doctor for her knee because her MRI showed that she had worn out all her cartilage, but initially she had no pain, but they wanted to do like orthopedic surgery right away, and then she got a second opinion, and finally they were like, no, if you don't have pain, like we'll wait. But you know, had she gone to see a PT, maybe like they would have just instead, you know, prescribed some exercises and she would have felt better. So I don't know if you guys want to touch on that a little bit, like doctor versus PT.
I think Emmi should speak to this most, but I'll just say that I'm a total convert. I was in a very similar situation to your friend, and like the first time I was ever injured, which many moons ago, there's been several since then. But I also went to, you know, the orthopedic specialist, and sort of the like third word out of their mouth is surgery. And you're like, wait, no, like, I don't think it's that bad. You know, what do I do? So, now, like I go to the physical therapist first, and they can usually kind of tell you how serious it is. But that's, again, I think it's also running specific. If you like, I don't know, slammed your knee into a board at playing a hockey game, like you might not necessarily go straight to the physical therapist. You might go get some imaging. But with running, yeah, I mean, take it away, Emmi.
Yeah, kind of exactly echoing what you guys are saying. You can really streamline the process, to be honest, by going first to your physical therapist. It might be a little bit different in Canada with the way the healthcare system works. I know in the US, in all 50 states, physical therapists actually are direct access practitioners. That was kind of a big shift when they switched the degree over from a master's to a doctorate, is to kind of be that first line of defense, kind of primary care for like musculoskeletal injuries that aren't traumatic, like a, you know, a severely broken bone or a, you know, a bike accident or something like that, where you're like, you know, being rushed into kind of trauma surgery or something like that. It can be a little tricky from like an insurance perspective. Some insurance companies do want to see the script from the doctor first. Other insurance companies are really flexible on that front. So that aspect can be a reason to go see your doctor first, because like you need the script from physical therapy in order for it to be covered by insurance. But I think as far as like efficiency with your time, getting in to see the physical therapist first is the way to go, because the doctor more likely than not is going to refer you to physical therapy. Surgeons are wired to do surgery, right? So if they come in and they're like, well, I can fix you with surgery, then that's often kind of just the way their brain works. So I would encourage, if it is kind of one of those like chronic overuse, just like sort of pesky things that you're dealing with, getting in to see the PT first is going to be the way to go. And a good physical therapist will know when it's time to refer you to a doctor. You know, if you've been in for a couple sessions and you're not making progress, if they suspect, you know, it might be a stress fracture and you need imaging, if they want to get a second opinion, if they think, you know, anti-inflammatories or an injection or something might be the case. And oftentimes the orthopedic surgeon's not the one to go to. There's orthopedists, there's physiatrists who specialize in runners and running injuries who can take kind of a more conservative perspective. But oftentimes the physical therapist that you might be seeing has like knows what doctors to go to that are not, you know, screaming surgery, but are going to kind of take a more conservative route. And I always tell my patients, you know, surgery isn't this like tabooed thing. There are some even running injuries that are chronic that do require surgery. But if that ends up being the case for you, it's so like research and everything supports that like the outcomes are better with conservative management first. You know, either you tried and it didn't work and then you feel more confident going into the surgery, or you got stronger so you have better outcome after the surgery, or you've kind of done the work to fix like the root of the problem. Because sometimes if you go straight to surgery, you're fixing the problem, but you're not really fixing the like why, what caused the problem. And so you really kind of need that holistic treatment, I think, in order to get the best results. So it's kind of a win-win to start with physical therapy. And obviously as a physical therapist, I'm quite biased, but
yeah, it's funny, Emmi, because, you know, as someone who often has to send, hopefully not too often, but has to send some of his athletes for treatment. And I sometimes have to make that decision. Should I have them see an orthopedist first? Should I have them go to a PT? And, it's the same thing. You said, like, I know which doctors I trust. And, but it's funny, like from a physical therapist point of view, I also know the ones with the doctor who's the extent of their physical therapy prescription is going to be evaluate and treat. So if it's something like that, sure, why didn't we just skip the middleman? And yes, there's also, as you said, there's surgeons. What's the old saying about, if you're a hammer, all you see everything as a nail.
All your problems are nails, yes.
Having those doctors who I trust is helpful. And also flipping it around. I mean, just coincidentally, Emmi, today, I was seeing a colleague of yours and went direct access, went straight to him. And he said, you know what? I think it might be a little something else going on. You need to get some imaging done. Go to the orthopedist. So it goes both ways. But yeah, I think more and more going straight to the PT does make sense.
I think my approach is my PT is an ultra runner and my doctor is a couch potato. So I go to my PT like 100% of the time.
The thing is here in Canada is that, I mean, like healthcare is free, but physical therapy is not, because it's not like under the under the healthcare umbrella.
The next question is, do you have insurance?
Yeah. So usually you're paying to see a physical therapist, but like not to see a doctor, except that, like the wait times can be long to see a doctor. I mean, unless it's an emergency. We're very good at emergencies, but not very good at the day-to-day stuff. Doctors can refer you to physical therapy that will be covered, but I think usually it's a certain amount, and it's like for if you had a health condition first. So it's like if you had the knee replacement surgery, you get physical therapy, and I think the public healthcare covers it, but yeah, it's not super clear like that, but it's really easy to see a physical therapist if you're willing to pay for it.
Insurance is a whole nother, could be its own separate podcast that we will.
It could, eh? Yeah, we could.
How to get through your insurance for your injury recovery, and we wouldn't read it and we wouldn't review it on Running Book Reviews.
No, and I would not write it.
Just in terms of sort of some general speak regarding injuries, you hear a lot of chat in amongst your running buddies along the lines of, and various degrees of knowledge around this, along the lines of, I've got suddenly developed some soreness in my calf or my muscle. Oh, I think I've torn a muscle. Everybody goes, oh, that's bad. Oh, I don't know. What are my recovery times on that? Oh, well, that depends. So can you just sort of, I think you do it nicely in the book, demystify the idea of a torn muscle. What is it? Where does it happen? How does it happen? Do they come in different flavors or species? Tell us about torn muscles.
Okay, so torn muscles, to be honest, like in the spectrum of injuries, a torn muscle is one of the better ones to get if you have to pick and choose your injuries. Muscle, if it's the muscle belly of the muscle, not the tendon, not where it's attaching into the bone, not where it's, kind of ligament connecting ligament. A muscle belly itself is one of the most well vascularized regions in our body. A ton of blood vessels are running through the muscles, which helps them. Issues with tendons, and when you start to have like kind of tendinitis, tendinosis, partial tearing of a tendon, tendons don't have great blood vessels. They are not well vascularized. But muscles are. So that means they heal. And if you, along with proper rehab, they heal pretty well. Time frame can be about 2 to 4 weeks. That depends on age. That depends on the severity of the tear. That depends on external factors, like how much are you sleeping? How are you eating? Are you properly resting? Are you also, not just completely total rest, but loading it appropriately, not too much, not too little, kind of that right happy medium that helps to increase blood flow without overstressing the muscle, causing it to kind of tear more. So there are things, and we kind of talk about that in the book, that can kind of help like speed up the process a little bit. A strain, if you're like, oh, I pulled my hamstring. Oh, I think I tweaked it. I strained it. That just kind of talks about the severity of the tear. So there's a strain. There's kind of, I believe there's kind of like grade 1 through 4, with grade 4 being the muscle has like ripped in half. And that does sometimes require surgery. If the muscle completely torn in half, I would say that is very, very, very rare in running, specifically distance running. Every now and then you'll see that in like a sprinter, but not generally kind of the population that this is targeted towards. And it just talks about like the number of fibers that tear. So if it's a couple of fibers, that might be a strain. If it's more than a couple, then you're kind of looking at grade 3, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4.
Okay, so they're all just, everything's just relative. They're all tears. It's just how much it's torn.
Yeah. And even soreness, like if you're really sore after a workout, those are tiny little micro tears. So you get little micro tears just from stressing your body. And that's why recovery is so important. That kind of time between workouts, that's when your body goes through, rebuilds, repairs, and gets better adapted to kind of handle the next stress, the next load.
And is it more common to get tears at junctures, sort of where tendons meet bones or tendons meet muscles, meet tendons?
I think that really depends. Yeah. I actually don't fully know the answer to that. That's a great question. I'd say from a treatment perspective, I'd see more acute ones are probably in the muscle belly, but like chronic, like if you've been running on a tendinitis or a tendinosis for a while and just kind of pushing through and running through it, that weakens the tendon, right? So that weakened tendon is more prone to tearing, and that can be a little bit more serious of an injury to heal from.
Yeah, you've said this twice now, tendinitis or tendinosis. So what's a tendinitis versus a tendinosis?
That's a great question. Tendinitis, technically, kind of the textbook definition, tendinitis is more acute. So it's kind of initial inflammation of the tendon. Tendinosis is when it's become more chronic. And you'll actually start to see some like degeneration of the tendon along with it. So it's kind of a progression.
Okay. So right now, my husband has shin splints, and you have a whole section on shin splints. It's hard to know, like, how do you know if the shin splint, like, is it a tendon injury? Like, is it a muscle injury? Because people say different things about shin splints and what causes them. Like there's some theories that it's, tight calves cause shin splints, and pulling on the little ligaments that are attached to the bone in the front cause shin splints. And there's all these theories about shin splints with respect to how different tissues heal. It means different things. And so what we really want to know is, can you run through shin splints and still get better? And if so, how do you do that?
So I guess the technical definition of shin splints is kind of the lay people term for it, is the doctor's diagnosis will be medial tibial stress syndrome, MTSS. And I feel like shin splints is a little bit of a catch-all. Like it could be anterior tibialis tendinitis, sometimes even posterior tib tendinitis can kind of get mixed up in there a little bit. But if you have shin splints by the technical definition, that does refer to like inflammation of the shin bone, kind of where those muscles are inserting into the bone. Shin splints by themselves, you can run through. Shin splints by themselves also can be caused by kind of all those reasons you just listed. It can be due to tightness in the calf. If the calf is really, really tight, that's going to kind of pull on the front of the shin, and cause like kind of inflammation and irritation where those muscles are inserting into the bone, which can be due to, overworking the calves. It can sometimes be weakness in the calf. It can also be form. If you're kind of overstriding and landing with that foot pretty far extended in front of you, you might picture that as kind of like a heel strike, where you're not getting your foot underneath you when you land. You're kind of landing with that foot in front of you. That's a lot of force going kind of straight through your heel bone and into the shin. So you're getting a lot of just like direct impact into the bone. What can happen if you push through shin splints for too long without doing anything to help kind of mitigate them is it can cause a stress reaction. So that's why it's something to kind of be wary of. So if it is, kind of pain, that what I tell, patients, athletes that I'm working with, if it's pain that's a little bit present at the beginning of your run, maybe a 2 or a 3, and it feels like it kind of loosens up and warms up and goes away as you run and doesn't get worse, then that's kind of a shin splint that I would say it would be okay to train through. You'd want to pick up a copy of our book, turn to the shin splint section, kind of start taking some of those tips that are in there and integrating them into your routine. If it's consistent for your run, if you start and you feel it a little bit, and as you're warming up and stuff, it's not going away, if it's staying kind of even or potentially getting a little bit worse, that's a sign that it could have progressed to more of that kind of bony tibial stress injury that will require time off from running.
And my thing, which again, I think is sort of echoing what Emmy's saying, is even if there's nothing inherently wrong with continuing to run, I still want to figure out what's going on that led to it. So yes, maybe clinically there's nothing wrong with continuing. There's no strict contraindication, but if we're doing the exact same thing and not addressing the cause, there's no reason to think it's going to get any better. And so the things I'm always looking for, a lot of what Emmy touched on, is do you have someone who's overstriding as opposed to their foot landing gently under their center of gravity? Sometimes it can be, sort of the real simple textbook ones. Okay, you increased your mileage too much too fast. You're running a lot of hills. You changed your footwear. So there's things to look at. But at least in my experience, quite often you can sort of get an idea of what's going on, either by talking to the runner or watching them. Like I don't have too many times when a runner says they've got something going on, that we're in that broad shin splints classification, where you then dive a little deeper and you can't figure out what could be causing it. They usually, if you ask a few questions or observe them, you can sort of get an idea of what's going on. Is it a lack of flexibility? Is it a lack of strength? Is it form related? Is it equipment related? Is it training related? And as long as you can address those things, then you can probably continue. It's just that, as Emmy said, if you just continue and you're fighting through pain and you're repeating the same thing over and over again, then the injury is going to progress. And it can be, stress reactions, stress fractures, things like that.
I think Jonathan made a really good point. Like if we're talking about shin splints specifically, that one is one that is like the most commonly associated with just like ramping up your mileage too fast. So oftentimes that's just a simple fix of you went from 0 to 60. If we just kind of reel it in a little bit, look at how much you're increasing your mileage by or intensity. That can be a pretty simple fix.
That's certainly something that your husband has done, ramped his mileage up.
Yeah. Yep.
So while we're using Liz's husband as a guinea pig for our discussion about the book, I noticed he recently came back from his massage covered in really big red circles. He looked like he had the polka dot jersey on for winning King of the Mountain in the Tour de France. But I believe he'd actually had a cupping session. So switching the subject completely, but staying with Liz's husband. Does cupping work? Cupping's this, for people who don't know, cupping's this thing where they put like little vacuums, well, big ones actually, depending on what area of your body, put vacuum cups on and sort of suck the area and generate some sort of redness or bleeding. Made famous by the swimmer guy, the American swimmer guy, Michael Phelps. Yeah, because he revealed all these red spots all over him.
It was amazing when people started seeing that. And if you could have bought stock in cupping,
everybody wanted to do it.
But it's true. I mean, I think we are often as athletes, we're looking for any edge, and we look often to elites to see what they do. And I think it's easy to sometimes fall into that trap of, okay, well, he does that. He has that for breakfast every day. I want to be as fast as he is, so I'm going to have that for breakfast, those types of things. And I think with cupping, there was definitely a lot of that. I think in the book, I reference how Mark Spitz back in, I think it was 1972, or before the Olympics, told the Russian coaches, yes, he was flying by everyone. He said, "Oh yeah, we did testing on my mustache," because he had that sort of trademark mustache, and the mustache is hydrodynamic, and it worked. And he said that a couple months later, he showed up at a meet, and all the Russians had mustaches, and that wasn't really why he was fast. So to be the cynic in the group, and the one, from a science-based point of view, the typical way that cupping is used is not supported by peer-reviewed science. That's not to say that there aren't clinicians who can adapt certain things of that practice. And I know Emmi, for one, does, and I'm not just trying to be uncharacteristically diplomatic. There are therapists who I trust and respect who use that concept at times, but in singular actions, but the whole concept of cupping as it is generally used, there's a lack of science to support it, and there's lots of anecdotal evidence in favor of it. And it's the old saying, like, the plural of anecdote is not data. And so I color me skeptical.
Oh yeah, I was just going to caveat slightly what Jonathan says is from a clinical perspective, I do really like the cups, but just as kind of like another tool to do some fascial manipulation. So I'm not looking at it from an Eastern perspective necessarily, although you could make the argument for just like kind of the positive effects of like down regulating the nervous system for runners who are typically pretty sympathetic, very upregulated. So sometimes the cupping can just be an opportunity for them to rest and kind of breathe deeply and be still for a while. You can also get that from like a hot bubble bath. But the cups can do similar. I like the example with the cups. I like the example of the IT band is a great one. An area I really see pretty good clinical efficacy of the cups. The IT band is a really thick structure that you really can't mobilize or do much to with a foam roller. It takes over like 2,000 pounds of compression to mobilize an IT band with a foam roller, which I think I wrote in the book would be equivalent to like an elephant walking on your leg. But with the cups, I found a really nice way I can kind of distract the IT band and like separate it from the quad in the front, from the hamstring in the back, and kind of get it to move and glide a little bit better. And that's provided really good relief to like clients with IT band syndrome. So that's that kind of areas throughout the body of like with like thick fascia, thoracolumbar fascia, some areas in the traps. Sometimes I'll use it on different parts, kind of up and down the chain. I have seen it be a good medium to kind of get things moving a little bit better.
Yeah. And as I said, I mean, I know that you do that, and there are other clinicians who I like and respect. And I had one worked on me he literally had a bunch of little plungers.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's the same thing as the plungers.
And in that respect, I certainly understand and will defer to you. It's the more traditional, yes, when you see Michael Phelps with, a dozen of them on his back, that's where, and again, look, more power to him. If it feels good and he likes it, great. But, again, I think, you could use the Mr. Bubble technique too, as you say, and there's lots of things. If all you're doing is just relaxing, that's a different situation.
I guess bottom line, the placebo effect is real. So
very much so.
If you think the Mark Spitz mustache is making you fast and you really believe in the mustache, maybe it's going to work for you to some extent.
Indeed.
Yeah, we all have superstitions, things that we insist to do, probably.
I had for a few years, I had these lucky socks. They were compression socks. And I called them my lucky socks because I ran a half marathon PB in them. And then they were my lucky socks. But then for a while, I wasn't running any PBs in them. So they got downgraded to just regular socks.
The socks were damaged.
The luck got washed out.
Yeah, I think so.
There's only so much luck in it. And
I shouldn't have washed them. That's probably the secret. You're not supposed to wash lucky socks, I think.
But in all seriousness, like, people have rituals, whatever. Wade Boggs had boiled chicken or whatever it was before every game and went to the Hall of Fame. And no, there wasn't likely a causal effect, but it worked for him. It made him comfortable. He believed in it. He liked that routine. For years, when I raced bikes, I swore a red bike is good for a half a mile per hour. And that was it. Like, I just felt faster. I was happier on that. I didn't really think it made a difference, but that's what worked for me. And
So let's talk about something else that you might be skeptical about. In the fourth chapter about soft tissue maintenance and self massage. So you talk about doing self massage. So that's like foam rollers, but you also mentioned very briefly something that Alan and I actually got to try once in a store. But these compression boots, like Normatec boots, like they're these big giant they look like big giant snow pants that you just pull over your legs and you sit on the couch and they like inflate and deflate, but they're, they're like $800 versus like the $30 foam roller. So which one's better? Like, should we all be spending $800 on these Normatec boots, or should we just like buy a foam roller?
I guess they're similar, but also different. The Normatecs are meant to kind of mimic your body's venous return system. So like, and when you get out of them, you kind of have that like Spider-Man kind of spider webby look on your legs. So that actually is helping your body to kind of like when you're running, your blood gets shunted to your extremities. It goes to your legs, tons and tons of blood flow to your legs. When you're done and you stop, all of that blood has to go against gravity, up through your legs to get back to your heart. So what the squeezy boots do is they help with that process. I tell my patients that, a long walk is equivalent to a poor man's Normatec, right? Just kind of keeping the circulation going. After, a 20-mile run, do we want to go on a long walk, or would we rather sit on our couch and put the squeezy boots on, So I do see some efficacy in those boots, helping with recovery, helping with circulation. You do get some compressive effects from the foam roller, if you are compressing on the muscle, but I think we typically view the foam roller more as like dealing with the tightness. Like if the quad's a little bit tight, if the cap's a little tight, if we're about to head out for the run and we feel like our quad's just kind of a little restricted or our calf feels tight, then that's like a good time to use the foam roller. So I would say they can kind of both exist in the world. You can get compression from a foam roller, but the squeezy boots are a really nice treat that do some good circulatory effects after a hard workout or a hard run when we're just feeling a little lazy, and rightfully so.
Yeah, I always think of the compression. I think of the boots more analogous to, as Emmi said, that long walk, that little cool down walk and elevating my feet rather than comparing them to a foam roller, which if anything, I'd compare that more to massage or self-massage or whatever. But, and I think, to answer your question, ultimately, if money's no object, those things are great. But I certainly don't think anyone has to feel like, if they don't have the $800 or whatever they cost, that they can't get any benefit. So then you elevate your legs, you go for a walk, you do a little self-massage, but they are kind of full. And there's a cool factor to them too.
They are really cool.
Who cares? But
I would love to see a research study comparing Normatecs for recovery to like someone laying on the ground with their feet up in the air for the same time. I haven't seen that, but I feel like that would be really interesting. Like, do you get the same effects by old school legs up on the wall that you do from the squeezy boots? Normatec would say probably not, but
of course.
Yeah.
Well, if they really believe that, they'll finance the study. We'll see how it turns out. You just listening to you guys, I've suddenly discovered a training secret that I've got that I didn't know I had, and I'd like to share it with the world, and that is get a dog. This ensures that you get the walk that you really don't want to do after you finish your run. There you go.
Aww.
Coach Kane is in the advanced training mode there. He's got the dog.
Except she's slowing down even more than I am. She's had a couple of knee surgeries and has arthritis. So her running days are behind her.
Aw, good for me. I have Alan's dog this weekend. He doesn't have it, so I'm gonna get the training benefit.
Awesome.
There you go. Yeah. You're welcome, Liz. You're welcome. No extra charge. We're talking a lot about conditions because we've all had them and we've all got them and we're all trying to get over them, and we think people are sort of interested in talking about them. And probably if people didn't have them, since they've been listening to us, they'll find that they've probably developed them, because that happens too, I think. They're sort of conditioned by osmosis. But I think I'd like to sort of switch to the more positive preventative thing a little bit. Strength training or resistance training. I think we're all of a mind now that it's an essential part of runners training. Everybody's saying it, so there are loads of anecdotes, but I don't know. Does that equal data? Coach Kane tells us no. But I think I'm hearing a lot that strength training is essential now, is an essential part, proven, not for debate anymore. Is it? What advice would you give runners regarding do's and don'ts around strength training?
Well, I think certainly you're right. I think the strong consensus is that strength training does benefit endurance athletes. My concern is always when I see some of my athletes getting too aggressive or competitive with that. Like I want my runner to be really competitive when they're competing. I don't want their egos going into the weight room with them.
Okay.
And, I always, if you're a competitive lifter, you lift to demonstrate strength. You use every trick in the book. You hold your breath, you arch your back, you use momentum, you do everything you can to move the weight from point A to point B. You're lifting to demonstrate strength. If you're an endurance athlete whose goal is to stay healthy and run faster, you should be doing everything you can to make every exercise as hard as possible and eliminate those quote unquote ways of cheating. So when I see an athlete doing those things, they're back into that sort of mindset of, oh, well, how much do you bench, bro? I don't want that. And I also don't want them spending so much time in the weight room or doing their strength training, wherever they're doing it, that it's detracting from their endurance training. So it's sometimes a delicate balance, but I don't think anyone on this panel here will argue against strength training for runners and other endurance athletes. And ladies, if you want to disagree, feel free.
I suspect part of the reason we hear so much about its essentialness now and whatever is because most people are not trying to spend all of their time in the weight room. They just want to be outside running. And so you really have to drag them kicking and screaming, towards a weight bench of any sort. So, I think it might give the wrong impression to some extent about the sort of essentialness and how much you need to be doing it. But I would bet that's because most of us would prefer just not to be doing it at all.
Yeah, I feel underwhelming when I'm in the gym. I'm sort of this old skinny guy who can't lift very much. So, your ego takes a hit every time you step into a gym if you're someone like me.
No, and it can be an intimidating setting. And look, I mean, I'm old and skinny too, but I've sort of been in that environment for the last 35, 40 years, whatever. But I get it. And I agree with you. And like I said, to me, it's just a matter of always remembering that you have opportunities to compete. When you're trying to break 3 hours for your marathon, that's your time to compete. You're not competing with anyone in there. So check the ego at the door when you walk into the gym. And to Allison's point also, I don't think you need, it can feel overwhelming, but I don't think you need a gym membership to do things effectively. I think you can, with some bands, a couple of dumbbells, some body weight exercises, there are plenty of things that you can do. And your muscles aren't that smart. They don't ultimately know whether they're working hard because they're moving your body weight, they're moving a Nautilus machine that costs $6,000, they're moving a bucket that you're picking up. Lots of things you can do. And it also doesn't have to be something where you're spending a prohibitive amount of time doing it. So I think Allison's 100% right that we sometimes build it up and it becomes so overwhelming that people then just go, the heck with it, I'm not doing it. And I think that's the exact wrong thing to do. If you don't have time to do as much as you can, look, by that same token, oh gee, I don't have time to run 6 miles today, so I only have time for 3, so I'm not going to run at all. That we wouldn't do that. We'd say, okay, let me get into the 3. Same thing. Okay, I can't get to the gym. I don't have a gym membership. I can't afford a gym membership. Yeah, you can do some pull-ups, some push-ups, some other things with body weight, with some items sitting around the apartment. So there's lots of things you can still do.
Yeah, Jonathan is so right. I think a little bit does go a long way. I also like to kind of tell my patients, I know like Elizabeth, you're training for the sub-3 marathon. The strength training itself does not equal faster running, but what it does is it kind of increases your buffer zone. So your body can better handle higher volume, less rest days, higher mileage without breaking down. Because when you're running is primarily cardiovascular. Runners are not bulky. We are pretty small because when we run, we're not using a lot of muscular strength. We're primarily relying on our ligaments, our Achilles tendon for kind of elastic recoil, springiness. We want efficiency when we're running. So we're not recruiting our entire muscle. like I was talking about, like the degree that the muscle tears, we're not recruiting our whole muscle when we run. And so what happens, use it or lose it. If we're not recruiting the whole muscle, then we can start to get a lot of like parts of our muscle that are more offline. But by doing the heavier loading at the gym, we're activating, we're engaging, we're kind of turning on more of that muscle. And that gives us, more quadriceps muscle that's helping absorb the shock of the downhill miles. Things like that can help prevent breakdown, that can help to prevent joint pain, that can help to prevent tendons tearing, things like that, right? If we're totally reliant on that tendon where it's attaching to the bone and we're not strengthening the muscle itself, we might rip the tendon off the bone, right? But if we do the strength training, then we increase that buffer. So lifting weights might not directly make you faster, but it will indirectly allow you to string together more days of consistent training without getting injured. And we especially see that like as we age, so like after age 35, you really start to, your muscles start to get dehydrated. They kind of start to like get a little smaller. And so that's where it becomes really critical. It's that like use it or lose it. You can still run just as fast and PR and do all the things. You just also have to lift weights in order to do those things.
Yeah. And Emmy and I are definitely very much on the same page with respect to that, because sometimes I'll have someone who's even geekier than I, say, well, you know what, there's really not a whole lot of evidence that, a stronger muscle is going to lead to being a faster muscle. And so is it really going to benefit that endurance athlete? And I think Emmy really hit it on the head, though. The issue is if we treat our strength training as injury prevention rather than performance enhancement, if by doing the strength training we're missing fewer days to injury, if by doing that strength training that's the result, then ultimately it does have a performance enhancing effect. So even if I say, sure, though, the strong muscle isn't necessarily going to be faster, if that stronger muscle is healthier and misses fewer days due to injury, it's faster.
That's fair. So maybe I'm going to sort of lump 3 questions into one. Okay, so I have a history with injury that's like very much like lower legs. So I had plantar fasciitis in both feet for like 3 years. And then I had Achilles issues for like a year. So when I initially got the plantar, I was wearing Hokas for the first time. And I had other shoes, but I just had done like a disproportionate amount of training in the Hoka shoes. Since then, I've discovered that every time I wear Hokas, and I've tried like different models, different years, so, different versions, and I get like pain underneath my big toe joint when I wear Hokas. And I don't know, it's that brand of shoe because it's like, it's different models, but they create the same pain. And then also while I had my Achilles issue, I noticed that I wasn't able to I was wearing the Saucony Endorphin Speeds, which are like plated shoes, but they have the nylon plate, not the carbon fiber plate. And while I had the injury, every time I would wear those shoes, the Achilles injury would be worse. So I couldn't wear them at all while I had the injury. But now that I'm recovered, I can wear them, but I'm like more careful because, I don't want to get the injury again, obviously. So I guess, all of this new shoe tech, because shoes have gotten built up and they've gotten plates like, it was that the Nike 4% racers were the only plated shoes. Now you have like trainers with plates and like Kinvaras with plates and all these shoe models are all getting plates and they're all getting like heaps of foam. So, plated shoes / heaps of foam, good or bad? Like, are we preventing? Because also you hear that, it could be good for sparing our legs, because the new foams are, protective. And so you could train more. So what do we do with all of this information?
I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I imagine you guys do too.
Everybody gets a turn.
It's, there's some really interesting articles out there on this that are kind of studying the plates and saying, oh, they're good for you, or they're bad for you. Like everything else, there's like a little bit of this component of it depends. And kind of my interpretation is that it can help with some problems, but can also cause some problems. So the plate, I think part of the power of the plate is it almost acts as an extension of our body's Achilles. I've seen some cases where if it is more of an acute Achilles injury, the plate can actually help because it's doing some of the workload. I think a lot of that depends on the profile of the shoe, whether there's like a higher heel toe drop versus a lower heel toe drop. Even across the plated shoes, there's pretty wide variety of like a little more minimal versus a little more maximal as far as that kind of heel toe profile. And a more minimal drop will irritate the Achilles. A more maximal drop will give it a little bit of kind of put it on slack and offload it a little bit. But by working as a part of the Achilles or as an extension of the Achilles, you're not using your Achilles as much. So over time, if you're doing all your runs in these plated shoes, then you are inherently weakening the structure of the Achilles, of the plantar fascia. So while short term, it might be preventative, if you go and maybe go do a long trail run and you're in your trail shoes or something, that could put you more at risk for injury. And then the other point it made that I thought was also really interesting is there is no doubt, so many of the world records have been broken now that those shoes have come. They do help you run more efficiently and more economically. And they feel really good and they can speed up recovery in part due to the foam, because part of what happens if we're going on a 20-mile run on pavement, that's just so much pounding your body into concrete. So a really soft, cushy foam can be injury preventative because you're not getting as much force into your body, but you feel better because the shoe is making you run faster, making you run a little bit more economically. And then through that, we tend to maybe overrun our easy runs, right? So we're running a little bit faster than we should on our easy runs, or we're going a little bit harder than we should on our long runs. And so it can also contribute to overtraining. So I think it's a really interesting topic to kind of talk about and debate, because there's a lot of different factors that can play in. It can be the fact that you feel good and you run a little faster. It can be the fact that it's protecting some areas, but also inherently weakening them. It's complicated. I'm not sure if Allison or Jonathan, you guys have anything to add, or if I'm the only super nerdy person who spends time reading about this.
Not at all. When the Nike shoes first came out, I wrote about a study related to trying to figure out how they work, because that's kind of what everyone wanted to know at first. And the only thing I'll add to everything you said, which was all very accurate as far as my knowledge goes, is that the foam actually does contribute sort of not exactly as a spring, but it's the compression and the energy return. So when it presses down, its ability to sort of pop back up under your foot also is contributing to the efficiency that you're getting from the shoe, just for those that are nerding out and want to know how these things work. I'll personally say that myself and people that I run with, a common rule of thumb that folks use is to do major workouts in these kinds of shoes, and then kind of doing all of your other running and other types of shoes to give, and I'm sure Emmi can speak to this more, but kind of give your foot and your joints different types of surfaces to land on. So that kind of helps with injury prevention, because you're not constantly if one shoe makes you land on one particular body part, you're not just jamming that part over and over again. So that's a benefit. You don't have to buy 500 pairs of shoes. You can have 2 or 3 types that you're rotating through.
No, Liz has to buy 500 pairs of shoes.
No judgment on those people. You can certainly, if you have space to store them, by all means. Yeah, so that's my 2 cents. I don't know if Jonathan has anything to add, but
no, honestly, I think what you guys both said makes a lot of sense, and I think there is a lot of emerging data, and there's been stuff in the last year, both in lay publications. Definitely Triathlete, Runner's World has covered it, but there does seem to be a little bbit more of a scientific, body of evidence that's at least being introduced. But I think, Liz, to your point, specifically for you, aside from the fact that you just lost any chance of a Hoka sponsorship coming your way.
Oh no, definitely.
But I do think, in all seriousness, different things work for different people, and again, not even trying to be diplomatic. There are certain shoes that I can't run in that far better runners than I, Allison could run in them. I can't. It does, it's not necessarily condemnation of the shoe. It's condemnation of the shoe for me. And it could just be the last that it's built on, nothing to do with the actual foam or anything else.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the one thing that I do tell my athletes, which again is in line with what Allison's saying, is I don't want them, even if they fall in love with that carbon plated shoe, I don't want them in it all the time. I want that to be something that's used sparingly. But no, I think you guys covered it very well.
Good stuff. I think plated shoes is we can ask whenever we can. We ask about plated shoes because it's an evolving thing, and it's also on the edge of performance. It's sure now that you can go faster if you're racing them. So it's a question of how are we going to use them? Not are we going to use them? We're going to use them. We need to use them in a way that works for the long term because we're in it for the long term, not just for the PR. But we want the PRs. We want the cake and we want the cherry and we want everything. What I'd like to do is, we need to be respectful of your time a little bit. But what I'd like to do is throw you all a bit of a general question and a bit open-ended. If I'm an athlete and I'm maybe not injured, but I'm trying to improve, and I want to stay uninjured, but I want to, press the pedal a bit and try to improve. What are the essential things? If you had to say, well, these are some things that you might not have thought of, or you need to make sure you've got. What are the essential things that they need to add into their routine if they don't already have it? From each of you, in turn, from your perspectives.
I think Jonathan should start.
Okay.
Don't make it a laundry list, though. Make it two top things.
Okay, in that case, I will go.
Grab the low-hanging fruit, Jonathan.
Well, no. It's actually I'm going to go for the fruit that probably wouldn't have been picked anyway. Maybe it's because I work with a lot of triathletes and race triathlons. When I work with a triathlete, if they come to me and they say, "I'm a really good swimmer. I'm a really good runner. I'm not so good on the bike." I'm staring right at you, Allison. It's easy for me to say, hey, let's ride, let's run a lot, let's swim a lot, and we'll figure it out. Do the things you're good at, do the things that are fun for you. But in fact, I like to take the approach of race your strength, train your weakness. So if I have that hypothetical, or in this case, not so hypothetical triathlete, we're going to work on their weakness, and they might not love me in the moment, but they're going to be a better, more well-rounded athlete. And even if we take them, sort of make the microcosm of a runner, if I have a runner who says, you know what, I'm blazing through every track workout you give me. The tempo runs are going great, but those long runs, my endurance isn't there. Guess what we're going to do? We're going to emphasize those long runs. Conversely, if I got someone who goes, I'll put in all the miles, that's great, but you asked me to do those, those 400s on the track, and I just don't have the turnover. I don't have the speed. Well, that's what we're going to work on. And in the short term, that's not the way to make an athlete happy. But in the long term, if they perform better, I think they will. And I think that's something, but we all tend to fall into that trap of doing what we're good at because we like it, and you get that constant satisfaction. But I think we'd be better served to focus on what we're not as good at.
Oh, I have a question then with respect to that. So when you work on those weaknesses, do you just work on them for the whole year, or will you pick a block of time? Okay, for the next, 2 months, we'll work on that weakness because my weakness is lactate threshold, and I just can't imagine doing lactate threshold every week. Because I could do super long runs, no problem. I could do track workouts, no problem. But that middle, kind of hard effort,
right.
Very much my weakness. And if I had to do that twice a week or even every week, I don't know. I think I would get depressed despite all the running.
I'm with you on that.
And look, and sometimes it's a negotiation, and sometimes you see how you're, again, I have athletes who, if I give them a workout and they come up a little short, there's two types of athletes. One who's going to come up a little short and write to me and say, "Coach, I came up short. I'm no good. I should take up bowling. I'm a failure. I'm sorry, please." And I get other athletes who go, "Coach, I came up a little short. Can I do it tomorrow? I wanted to try again." So it depends. Some of it, as much as I get bogged down with the physiology of it, some of it depends on the psychology of it. And if you're telling me there's no way on God's green earth I'm going to do that all the time, then okay, I'm not going to force it on you. But I think. But
then if you give me if you give me a time limit, and you're okay, well, for the next 6 weeks we're going to work on this, then I could wrap my head around that and be okay, let's work on it.
And there's also different ways to attack it. It's not always just. Lactate threshold. Athletes respond to different types of workouts. Some athletes you can just sort of push their lactate threshold up a little bit. So you can have them work at, 95% of their threshold, but that will help to bring it up. Other athletes seem to respond, and both personally, I've seen it, and also clinically, the science seems to support it. Some you need to go above their threshold. So you can't push it, you need to pull it. So you need to have them go above that and then work with it. In some cases, you'll use different techniques. You'll use both techniques at different times. So Liz, to that, maybe we have to play around with it. Maybe it would be, okay, this month we're going to try this. Next one, and then we'll give you a week or two respite from doing it, and then we're going to try it again. We're going to try something else. So yeah, look, ultimately, you see what an athlete is willing to do, but I think at least conceptually, if an athlete will accept that notion of working on what they're least good at, it will make them into a better athlete.
And I want to add to, I think, kind of the two biggest, and Jonathan, I think you might agree with me on this, kind of the two biggest training errors that I see a lot of athletes making, that are very, I won't say easily fixable, but that are fixable, is easy runs too fast. A lot of us runners we like to feel the burn. We like to feel like we're working and pushing, and doing that on the easy runs can be detrimental to your training. So that right there is a huge one. Slowing down on your easy runs can also allow you to handle more volume, recover better, so many things. It's almost impossible to go too slow on an easy run. And then negative splitting workouts. That's also, I tell everyone, I talk to my patients and my athletes who are like, I felt so good at the beginning. And then by the end, I was really struggling, but I'm like, everyone feels good at the beginning. That first rep feels really good. You're fresh. It's so easy. It's so easy to go out hot. It is so hard to be patient and be controlled at the beginning. And it's also, I think, very silly and naive to think that if you're not executing that in practice, you're going to execute that in a race, right? Perfect practice makes perfect. So if that's the way you want to race in this kind of negative split, which actually makes it so your body won't pass its lactic threshold until too late. So you're not going to bonk. You got to do that in practice. So I think those two things are really big. And then also kind of just back to Jonathan's point with the low hanging fruit. And I think this is something you and I have talked about a lot. It's kind of the elements that are not sexy, not that fancy, just prioritizing sleep and fuel, very, very basic. Sleeping enough, fueling enough are also incredibly important. We talk about the Normatex, we talk about the cupping, we kind of talk about all these little nuances. And to be honest, none of that really matters if you're not sleeping and if you're not fueling. Those are kind of the rocks, I think, of good recovery.
Yeah, I'll just give an answer from a little bit of a different angle, but I think if I were to talk to some sort of newer runner that's just generally running and wants to get faster, I would say do your workouts with some people that are a little bit faster than you. Not your easy runs. Don't do your easy ones with people that are a little bit faster than you, because you will be tempted to try to stick around, and that's not a good idea. But yeah, if you can, it's a easier way to push yourself than trying to just do it alone. Talk to your coach if you have a coach, make sure it's all kosher. You don't want to be killing yourself. But yeah, that's what I would say, because I find the social component of running is really, really helpful in ways that you don't even necessarily notice until you're doing it.
That's perfect.
Yeah. I would say Liz and I are accountability buddies. We train together quite a bit, and often I end up doing the training because I know I've got to meet Liz and she's going to run at this speed and I'll have to run beside her. So if I was on my own, I think maybe I wouldn't. So,
or sometimes Alan will do the training just because he knows that mine is going to appear on Strava at some point, and so he's got to have one too to match it.
But it's true though, that accountability. Again, I love to think that all my athletes are just robotic and will do exactly as they're told, but we're humans, and yes, having that accountability, whether it's virtual or look, even if I'm running a group track workout, there's sometimes that the faster runner is going to get pulled back, sometimes the slower runner is going to get pulled up, or sometimes it's not exactly the workout that I would have them do if I were programming for each individual, but that group helps. It helps psychologically, it helps. So yeah, there's something to be said for that, and and we find what works, and I think sometimes we get pulled into these rules of like, oh no, I need to do stuff on my own because whatever, or oh, real runners don't use treadmills or this or that. And I think, yeah, there's plenty of real runners who hate treadmills. There's plenty of real runners who thrive with them. You know, again, if it's just Strava that works, if knowing that, yeah, someone, look, honestly, a lot of the work that I do, please don't tell my grad school professor this, but a lot of the stuff I do isn't exactly cutting edge science, but my athlete knows that I'm going to be checking their Training Peaks account in the morning. And if they didn't get that, I'm going to write them a little love note and say, hey, what happened? And that's probably makes it, again, if something happened, oh, you know, my kid is sick, great. But if it's, I wasn't in the mood, they're a little less likely to do that just because of that accountability that a training buddy, a coach, a partner, whomever can provide.
Yeah, I think there was one winter where like I just got tired of like trying to run paces in the winter outside in the snow with like my 3 layers of tights, and I started running my workouts so like twice a week on the treadmill because I had access to one, and Alan called me a wuss.
That's because I don't own a treadmill and didn't get to do that.
Yeah, I think that's it. So before we wrap up, like I just wanted to, maybe you guys can talk about how do you want people to use the book? Like, is it a book? I mean, we just read it cover to cover, but is it something that you designed where you designed it as like something that they could like dip into the sections, or do you hope that people read it cover to cover?
Yeah, practically speaking, you had already mentioned the chart at the front, and that hopefully sort of answers your question. I think it's very designed for people to dip in and out, because I think it's a little unrealistic to expect people to read about every single injury, including ones they've never had or never heard of. But if your knee hurts, you're going to try to find all of the reasons that it could possibly hurt. So you're probably going to read several chapters in this book because there's several reasons your knee might hurt. And likewise, when you're rehabbing, if you want to go back and remember how to do a certain exercise, the book is designed really intentionally to make that easy to do. It wasn't easy to write, let me tell you. Trying to figure out where to put everything and how to connect it all was a real challenge, but hopefully it's easy to use. There are handy pictures, all that good stuff. And then the part that I would say, reading straight through, the back of the book is more designed for that, for folks that don't know much about structured training. So kind of the 4th section is probably the section that's the easiest to read straight through, and that you would want to just for fun and for educational purposes. Did I miss anything? My co-authors? Okay, good.
Nope, that was perfect.
We'll give a little summary point each on the book. But before we do that, where can people follow you to see what you're up to? Is there anything you want to tell us about what you're up to now? And do you want to direct people in particular to get the book from somewhere specific? Everybody listening has to go and buy the book. Of course, that's compulsory. So do you want them to go anywhere in particular? We could mention that. Otherwise, you know, what are your handles? Where can people check up on you to see if you're behaving yourself in social media?
Sure. So to answer your earlier question, you can, anywhere that you can find the book is totally fine to buy it. You don't need to mention anywhere specific. You can find it on Human Kinetics, that's the publisher. You can find it on Amazon. You can probably find it on Barnes & Noble website. So yeah, wherever your preferred retailer is, please just buy the book. You can find me, all over the web. So you can find me on Instagram at Allison the Stein, Stein. That's kind of like a fun account. You'll see running and cooking and my cat.
Oh, I like cats.
Not cooking the cat, though.
No. There's commas in there.
We won't be seeing very much bike riding, according to Coach King.
Yeah, no, you won't see too many pictures of that, at least not right now. Never say never. But and then you can also find me, I recently rebranded my business, so you can find me at agoldstandard.com if you want to learn more about what I do professionally, writing and editing services primarily. Cool. And yeah, I'm a lady for hire.
Emmi, you got next window on you there.
All right. So my Instagram is Coach Emmi, EMMI.DPT. And my website is coachemmi.com. If the book doesn't quite get you to where you need to be with your injury and rehab goals, I do treat in New York City. I split time between the Upper West Side and Brooklyn. And I also do virtual appointments. So you can find me on my website. I have a little form you can fill out, like a ask here, and that gets sent to my email. So if you do have more, intense issues that you want to kind of work one-on-one with, I'm out in the world treating as a physical therapist. If you're a mom who just had a baby and are trying to get back into running after you had your baby, I love working with those patients as well. Or, if you're training for your marathon and your knee is hurting and the book didn't quite fix it, you might need an elbow or a cup on your IT band, then I'm out there.
Good stuff.
My website is coachcane.com, COACHCANE.com. On Instagram, you want pretty pictures, I'm Coach Kane. On Twitter, if you want snarky bad attitude, I am Real Coach Kane, because some interloper has my preferred handle.
Okay.
By all means, reach out. I love going back and forth on social. I love hearing questions and getting input. So I welcome anything anyone wants to throw out at me.
Good stuff.
I will add that if you like to see bad science get called out, that is what you will find on Coach Kane's Twitter. So
that's always
fun. It's bad science and people cheating in races. If that's what you want, I'm your guy.
You've been busy recently, probably with 11,000 Mexicans.
Oh yeah, that one. But talk about low hanging fruit. That was too easy. I like finding the obscure ones and
the ones that thought they were going to get away with it. Maybe we'll just give our overviews. First of all, I'll come back to the exercise finder right at the front. Fantastic, new, innovative way to start a book. I was very tempted to start with this and just jump into what I was most interested in. And I guess that's what you've said is the intention, that people would, go, okay, I've got a shin. I think I've got shin splints. What does the exercise tell me? Am I doing those things? And lead you straight to where it's the hot spot for you, which is, I think, is a great way to use the book effectively, and another good reason why everybody should get one. The book's sort of a large format and a really friendly read, as I said earlier. I think you've done a great job of explaining the physiology and the science. But there are lots of color pictures and diagrams, and the first I was in 3 pages and I'd learned what a sagittal plane was, how you operated in a sagittal plane. I thought, I've always wondered that. Does scientific people talk about that? Now I know what it is. So it just went from strength to strength there. If you're not familiar with body structure and how it works, it's really explained nicely how it works, then what goes wrong with it, and then how you fix it. It's all logical stuff. If you're a runner, for sure you've heard about many of the conditions if you haven't had most of the conditions that are in the book. So it's great to get to know them better and how to avoid them, basically.
So I guess I'll just start by saying that if you do decide to read the book almost cover to cover, the first section is also useful because it talks about like the different body tissues, how they react under stress and how they heal, which is really interesting because, like the things like tendons, they heal in a different way than muscles. So I thought that was pretty informative. And also the last section that was mentioned earlier was really good because it was all about like kind of the basics, proper training progression, working on running form. And that doesn't mean that there is one specific form. It just means that you should work on your running form and fueling appropriately. So that was a really good section. I think like if you do read the book cover to cover, maybe in the middle, like if you didn't have all the conditions, you can skip over the ones you didn't have yet and just come back to them once, you do get those in the future, or maybe not, hopefully. But also, I really loved the exercise finder at the beginning of the book that I mentioned earlier, because I thought that was fantastic. Because oftentimes, you read the book and you're like, oh, this was all so great. And then you're like trying to figure out where you saw that exercise that you wanted to try. Of course, being a human kinetics book, it's got plenty of color photos, like Alan mentioned, and even drawings to illustrate things that are being discussed, like bones and muscle. And I love the 3-way collaboration between PT, coach, and sports writer. All the makings of a great book. And also, I guess I'll just mention this because you guys didn't mention it, but if you're looking for continuous education credits, then this book, you can get a discount on a exam at the end of the book. There's a 50% discount on the exam. That's a great book. I'm definitely going to be doing some of the exercises. Thank you for listening to another episode of Running Book Reviews. Big thank you to the publisher, Human Kinetics, for providing review copies of the book. And big thanks to Emmi, Jonathan, and Allison for spending time with us today. If you would like to leave us feedback about how we can improve the podcast or want to suggest a book that you would like us to review in a future episode, please leave us a comment on social media. We are Running Book Reviews on Facebook and Instagram, and on Twitter, we are reviews_running. Please also follow us on social media to find out about new episodes when they're released, or you can just subscribe to the podcast on your favorite streaming platform. If you've been listening to us for a while and are wondering how else you can help us out, there are a few ways. You can spread the word about the podcast and tell your friends, send them your favorite episode, and they can become listeners too. You can also rate us on Spotify out of 5 stars, or you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts if that's how you listen to your podcasts. And you can sign up on Buy Me a Coffee and follow us, because every so often we'll post something on Buy Me a Coffee and you'll get notified by email. So we have all kinds of different things there. There are photos from when I got married in my running shoes. And what else do we have there, Alan?
All sorts of outtakes and little bits that are not associated with books.
Yes, yep. And Alan's race report from his sub 3-hour marathon last year. So if you wanted to read that, it's all over there. That's it for now.
Bye.
Bye.